Is the United States going to use military force to take control of the Panama Canal? The question was posed to President-elect Donald Trump. The answer, maybe. But Mr. Trump definitely did not rule it out. So the question many might be asking is why? Well, there are a lot of national security and economic interests for the United States when talking about the canal. In fact, that's why the thing was built in the first place. In 1898, the USS Oregon was going from California to Cuba during the Spanish-American War and had to sail around South America to get there. So President Teddy Roosevelt worked with newly independent Panama and ordered the canal's construction. In 1914, it opened.
The canal zone was given to the United States in perpetuity. We paid the Panamanians $10 million. An annual stipend of $250,000. That was upped in two subsequent treaties, 1936 and 1955.
Sal Mercogliano is a college professor and shipping expert. He's also the host of the YouTube channel What's Going On with Shipping. I knew a bit about the canal before talking to Sal, like how the U.S. military Southern Command was based there until 1999. That's when the U.S. handed control of the canal over to the Panamanians, thanks to a deal reached during the Carter administration. But the U.S. still uses the canal a lot.
The canal is vital for the United States. The biggest single user of the canal, by outshining everyone, probably combined, is the United States. Now, it's not U.S. ships so much going through, but it's U.S. cargo going through. The second country that uses it the most is China.
And that all sort of makes sense when you think about it. The U.S. and China are huge trade partners, which means lots of goods going back and forth to each other's ports. The U.S. also sends a lot of goods to other Pacific nations from the East Coast and from one side of the country to the other. It's just a lot cheaper than trying to do it by rail. Mercogliano says all that China-linked trade also attracts Chinese investment in some of the ancillary functions of the canal, like port operations and water management.
Which is very typical for what we see China around the world. They have influence in a lot of ports and a lot of infrastructure around the world. The concern that obviously the United States has is that should an incident occur that could prevent us from using the canal, this is vital for us. We have seen a time where the U.S. gets into a conflict where maybe our actions upset allies, or maybe someone doesn't want to see as quote unquote supporting those allies. So, for example, recently, Israel-Gaza, we sent a ship through the Panama Canal from the West Coast that was carrying an Iron Dome system we were bringing back to Israel. Recently, we had a ship that was stopping in Spain, and the Spanish authorities said that ship can't dock in Spain. What if Panama decides to say, hey, because of what's happening in this region, we're not going to allow your ships to go through? That's the fear that exists, that the Panamanians may sit there and say, listen, we don't want to show complicity or that we support your view in this action.
There are also concerns about resource management and damage to the canal. The locks are fed by a freshwater lake, and if the lake runs dry or low, the canal can shut down. It is also fairly easy to damage the canal. And if ships can't transit the 50-mile stretch of water connecting the Caribbean Sea to the Pacific Ocean, then response times to, say, potential conflicts in the Pacific would be hampered. And while U.S. aircraft carriers are still too big to fit through the canal,
our destroyers, our submarines, and most importantly, our strategic sea lift vessels, the vessels we require to pick up the Army and drop them off, we have a third of our strategic sea lift on the East Coast, a third on the Gulf Coast, a third on the Pacific Coast. If you run a scenario where we need to deploy forces across the Pacific and China puts leverage against Panama and says, listen, Panama, don't allow American military ships to come through, then 2/3 of our strategic sea lift are on the wrong side of the canal. And what that means is it's just a longer deployment cycle to get ships there. It doesn't mean we can't get them there. There are alternatives. But the reason we built the canal in the first place back in 1914 was to have that shortcut.
While no one is directly accusing China yet of making plans to prevent the U.S. from using the canal, folks aren't exactly waiting for it to happen before acting either. Some members of Congress already introduced a bill to purchase the canal, and even if Panama's president says it's not for sale, Mercogliano says the fact we're talking about it at all shows just how focused the incoming Trump administration is on maritime issues, predicting a very busy 4 years ahead for the sector. For Straight Arrow News, I'm Ryan Robertson. For more of our unbiased straight fact reporting, be sure to download the Straight Arrow News app today.